welcome to Short Story Scene. I'm your host, the storyteller, and here we have a tale called The Lagoon by Joseph Conrad. The white man, leaning with both his arms over the roof of the little house in the stern of the boat, said to the steersman, We will pass the night in Arstad's clearing. It is late. The Malay only grunted and went on looking fixedly at the river. The white man rested his chin and his crossed arms and gazed at the wake of the boat. At the end of the straight avenue of forest cuts by the intense glitter of the river, the sun appeared unclouded and dazzling, poised low over the water that shone smoothly like a band of metal. The forest, somber and dull, stood motionless and silent on each side of the broad stream. At the foot of the big, towering trees, trunkless nimpa palms rose from the mud of the bank, and bunches of leaves, enormous and heavy, that hung unstirring over the brown swirl of eddies. In the stillness of the air, every tree, every leaf, every burrow, every tendril of creeper, and every petal of minute blossoms seemed to have been bewitched in an immobility perfect and final. Nothing moved on the river but the 8 paddles that rose flashing regularly, dipped together with a single splash, while the steersman swept right over the left with a periodic and sudden flourish of his blade, describing a glinting semicircle above his head. The churned up water frothed alongside with a confused murmur, and the white man's canoe, advancing upstream in the short-lived disturbance of its own making, seemed to enter the portals of the land from which their very memory of motion had forever departed. The white man, turning his back upon the setting sun, looked along the empty and broad expanse of the sea reach for the last 3 miles of the coarse and wandering, hesitating river, as if enticed irresistibly by the freedom of the open horizon. Flows straight into the sea, flows straight to the east. To the east the harbors both light and darkness. Astern of the boat, repeated call of some bird, a cry discontent and feeble, skipped along over the smooth water and lost itself, before it could reach the other shore in the breathless silence of the world. The steersman dug a paddle in the stream and held hard with a stiffened arm. His body thrown forward, the water gurgled aloud, and suddenly the long straight reach seemed to pivot on its center. The forest swung in a semicircle, and slanting beams of sunset touched the broad side of the canoe with a fiery glow, throwing the slender and distorted shadows of its crew upon the streaked glitter of the river. The white man turned to look ahead. The course of the boat had been altered at right angles into the stream, and the carved dragon head of the prow was pointing now at the gape of the framing bushes of the bank, and glided through the bushing and the overhanging twigs, and disappeared from the river like some slim amphibious creature leaving the water for its lair in the forest. The narrow creek was like a ditch, tortuous, fabulously deep, filled with the gloom under the thin strip of pure and shining blue of the heaven. Immense trees soared up, invisible behind the festooned draperies of the creepers. Here and there, near the glistening blackness of the water, a twisted root of some tall tree shone amongst the tracery of the small ferns, black and dull, withering and motionless, like an arrested snake, and the short words of the paddlers reverberated loudly between the thick and the somber walls of the vegetation. Darkness oozed out from between the trees, through the tangled maze of creepers, from behind the great, fantastic, and unstirring leaves. The darkness, mysterious, inconceivable, and the darkness scented the poisonous of impenetrable forest. The men pulled in the shallow water, and the creek broadened, opening out into a wide sweep of stagnant lagoon. The forest receded from the marshy bank, leaving a level strip of bright green, reedy grass to the frame of the reflected blueness of the sky. The fleecy pink cloud drifted high above, trailing the delicate coloring of his image under the floating leaves of the silvery blossoms of the lotus. A little house perched on the high piles appeared black in the distance. Near it, 2 tall ninbong palms, and seemed to have come out of the forest in the background, leaned slightly over the ragged roof with a suggestion of sad tenderness and care under the droop of their leafy and soaring heads. The steersman pointed with his paddle, said, "Arstadt is there. I see his canoe fast between the piles." The polers ran along the sides of the boat, glancing over their shoulders at the end of the day's journey. They would have preferred to spend the night somewhere else than on this lagoon of weird aspect and ghostly reputation. Moreover, they disliked Arstadt, first as a stranger, and also because he who repairs a ruined house and dwells in it proclaims that he is not afraid to live amongst the spirits that haunt the place abandoned by mankind. Such a man can disturb the course of fate by glances or words, while his familiar ghosts are not easy to propitiate by casual wayfarers, upon whom they long to wreak the malice of their human master. White men care not for such things, being unbelievers in the league with the father of evil, who leads the unharmed through the invisible dangers of this world. To the warnings of the righteous they oppose an offense, persistence of disbelief. What is there to be done? So they thought, throwing their weight on the end of their long poles. The big canoe glided on swiftly, noiselessly, and smoothly towards the Arstadt's clearing till the great rattling of poles thrown down and the loud murmurs of Allah be praised, and it came from the gentle knocking against the crooked piles below the house. The boatmen with the uplifted faces shouted discordantly, "Arstadt, oh Arstadt!" Nobody came. The white man began to climb the rude ladder, giving access to the bamboo platform before the house. The jargon of the boat was sulkily, "I will cook in the sampan and sleep on the water." "Pass my blankets and the baskets," said the white man curtly. He knelt on the edge of the platform to receive the bundle. Then the boat shoved off, and the white man, standing up, confronted Arstadt, who had come out through the low door of his hut. He was a man young, powerful, with broad chest and muscular arms. He had nothing on but his sarong, and his head was bare. His big, soft eyes stared eagerly at the white man, but his voice was demeanor or composed as he asked, without any words of greeting, "Have you medicine, Tuan?" "No," said the visitor in a startled tone. "No, why? Is there sickness in the house?" "Enter," he said, replied Arstadt in the same calm manner, and turned shortly around, passed again through the small doorway. The white man, dropping his bundles, followed. In the dim light of the dwelling, he made out the couch of the bamboos, and the woman stretched out on her back under a broad sheet of red cotton cloth. She lay still as if dead, but her big eyes, wide open, glittered in the gloom, staring upwards at the slender rafters, motionless and unseeing. She was in a high fever and evidently unconscious. Her cheeks were sunken slightly, and her lips were partly open, and on the young face there was an ominous and fixed expression, the absorbed contemplation expression of the unconsciousness who are going to die. The two men stood looking down at her in silence. "Has she been long ill?" asked the traveler. "I have not slept for 5 nights," answered Malay in a deliberate tone. At first she heard voices calling her from the water and struggled against me who held her. But since the sun of today rose, she hears nothing. She hears not me. She hears nothing. She sees not me. Me! He remained silent for a moment, then asked softly, Tuan, will she die? I fear so, said the white man sorrowfully. He had known Arstets years ago in a far country in times of trouble and danger, when no friendship is to be despised, and since his Malay friend had come unexpectedly to dwell in the hut on the lagoon with a strange woman. He had slept many times there in his journeys up and down the river. He liked the man who knew how to keep faith in counsel and how to fight without fear by the side of his white friend. He liked him, not so much perhaps as a man likes his favorite dog, but still he liked him well enough to help and ask no questions, to think sometimes vaguely and hazily in the midst of his own pursuits about the lonely man and then the long-haired woman with the audacious face and triumphant eyes, who lived together hidden by the forest, alone and feared. The white man came out of the hut in a time to see the enormous configuration of sunset put out of the swift, stealthy shadows that, rising like a black and impalpable vapor above the treetops, spread over the heaven, extinguishing the crimson glow of the floating clouds and the red brilliance of departing daylight. In a few moments all the stars came out above the intense blackness, and of the earth and the great lagoon, gleaming suddenly in the reflected lights, resembled an oval patch of night sky flung down into the hopeless, abysmal night of the wilderness. The white man had some supper out of the basket, then collecting a few sticks that lay about the platform, made up a small fire, not for warmth, but for the sake of the smoke, which would keep off the mosquitoes. He wrapped himself in blankets and sat with his back against the reed wall of the house, smoking thoughtfully. Arstad came through the doorway with the noiseless steps and squatted down by the fire. The white man moved his outstretched legs a little. She breathes, said Arstad in a low voice, anticipating the expected question. She breathes and burns as if with great fire. She speaks not, she hears not, and burns. He paused for a moment, then asked in a quiet, incurious tone, Tuan, will she die? The white man moved his shoulders uneasily and muttered in a hesitating manner, if such is her fate. No, Tuan, said Arstad calmly. If such is my fate, I hear, I see, I wait. I remember, Tuan. Do you remember the old days? Do you remember my brother? Yes, said the white man. The Malay rose suddenly and went in. The other, sitting still outside, could hear the voice in the hut. Arstad said, Hear me, speak. His words were succeeded by a complete silence. Oh, de Millen, he cried suddenly. After that cry there was a deep sigh. Arstad came out and sank down again in his old place. They sat in silence before the fire. There was no sound within the house. There was no sound near them. But far away on the lagoon they could hear the voices of the boatmen, ringing fitful and distinct on the calm water. The fire in the boats of the sampan shone faintly in the distance with the hazy red glow. Then it died out. The voices ceased. The land and the water slept invisible, unstirring and mute. It was as though here had been nothing left in the world but the glitter of the stars streaming ceaseless and vain through the black stillness of the night. The white man gazed straight before him into the darkness with wide open eyes. The fear and fascination, the inspiration of the wonder of death near, unavoidable and unseen, soothed and unrest his race and stirred the most indistinct, the most inanimate of his thoughts. The ever-ready superstition of evil, the gnawing superstition that lurks in our hearts, flowed out into the stillness around him, in the stillness profound and dumb, and made it appear untrustworthy and infamous. like the placid and the impenetrable mask of an unjustifiable violence. In the fleeting and powerful disturbance of his being, the earth enfolded in on the starlight peace became the shadowy country of inhuman strife, a battlefield of phantoms, terrible and charming, august and ignoble, struggling adherently for the possession of our hopeless hearts, an unquiet and mysterious country of inextinguishable desires and fears. A plaintive murmur rose in the night, a murmur saddening and startling, as if a great solitudes of surrounding woods had tried to whisper into the ear the wisdom of their immense and lofty indifference. Sounds hesitating and vague floating in the air around him shaped themselves slowly in the words, and the last flowed on gently in the murmuring stream of soft and monotonous sentences. He stirred like a man waking up and changed his position slightly, ere sat motionless and shadowy, sitting with bowed head under the stars, was speaking in a low and dreamy tone. For where can we lay down the heaviness of our trouble but not the friend's heart? A man must speak of war and of love. You, Tuan, know what war is, and you have seen me in time of danger seek death as other men seek life. A writing may be lost, a lie may be written, but what the eye has seen is truth and remains in the mind. I remember, said the white man quietly. Erstat went on with a mournful composure. Therefore I shall speak to you of love. Speak in the night, speak before both night and love are gone, and the eye of the day looks upon my sorrow, my shame, upon my blackened face, upon my burnt-up heart. I sigh short and faint, marked an almost imperceptible pause, and then his words flowed, without a stir, without a gesture. After the time of trouble and war was over, and you went away from my country in the pursuit of your desires, which we men of the islands cannot understand, I and my brother became again, and we had been before, the sword bearers of the ruler. You know we were men of the family, belonging to a ruling race, and more fit than any to carry on our right shoulder the emblem of power. And in the time of prosperity, Si Den Ring showed us favor as we, in the time of sorrow, had showed to him the faithfulness of our courage. It was time of peace, a time of deer hunts and cockfights, of idle talks and foolish squabbles between men whose bullies are full of weapons are rusty. But the sorrow where watched the young rice shoots grow up without fear, and the traders came and went and departed lean and returned fat into the river of peace. They brought news too, brought lies and truth mixed together, so that no man knew when to rejoice and when to be sorry. We heard from them about you also. They had seen you here and had seen you there, and I was glad to hear, for I remembered the stirring times. And I also remembered you, Tuan, till the time came when my eyes could see nothing in the past, because they had looked upon the one who is dying there in the house. He stopped and exclaimed in an intense whisper, O Marabahai, O calamity. He went on speaking a little louder. There is no worse enemy, no better friend than a brother, Tuan. For one brother knows another, and in imperfect knowledge is strength for the good or evil. I love my brother. I went to him and told him that I could see nothing but one face, hear nothing but one voice. He told me, open your heart so that she can see what is in it, and wait. Patience is wisdom. Inchi Mide may die, or our ruler may throw off his fear of a woman. I waited, and I remembered the lady with the veiled face, Tuan, and the fear of our ruler became her cunning and temper. And if she wanted her servant, what could I do? But I fed the hunger of my heart on short glances and stealth words, I loitered on the path of the bathhouses in the daytime, and when the sun had fallen behind in the forest, I crept along the jasmine hedges of the women's courtyard. Unseeing, we spoke to one another through the scent of flowers, through the veil of leaves, through the blades of long grass, and stood still before our lips. So great was our prudence, so faint was the murmur of our great longing. The time passed swiftly, and there was whispers amongst women, and our enemies watched. My brother was gloomy, and I began to think of killing and of the fierce death. We are the people who take what they want. Like you whites, they are in time when the man should forget loyalty and respect, might the authority and given the rulers, but to all men is given love and strength and courage. My brother said, "You shall take her from their midst, and we are two who are like one." And I answered, "Let it be soon, for I find no warmth in the sunlight that does not shine upon her." Our time came when the ruler and all the other great people went to the mouth of the river to fish by torchlight. There were hundreds of boats, and on the white sand between the water and the forest dwelled the leaves built for the households of Rajas. The smoke of cooking fires was a blue mist of the evening, and many voices rang in joyfully. While they were making the boats ready to beat up the fish, my brother came to me and said, "Tonight." I looked to my weapons, and when the time came, our canoe took its place in the circle of boats carrying the torches. The lights blazed on the water, but behind the boats there was darkness. When the shouting began and the excitement made them like mad, we dropped out. The water swallowed our fire, and we floated back to the shore that was dark, with only here and there the glimmer of embers. We could hear the talk of slave girls amongst the sheds. Then we found a place deserted and silent. We waited there. She came running along the shore, rapid and leaving no trace, like a leaf driven by the wind to the sea. My brother said gloomily, "Go and take her, carry her into our boat." I lifted her into my arms. She panted. Her heart was beating against my breast. I said, "I take you from those people. You came to the cry of my heart, but my arms take you into my boat, and against the will of the great." "It is right," said my brother. "We are men who take what we want and can hold it against many. We should have taken her in daylight," I said. "Let us be off." For since she was in my boat, I began to think of our ruler's many men. "Yes, let us be off," said my brother. "We will cast out this boat in our country now, and the sea is our refuge." He lingered with his foot on the shore, and I entreated him to haste, for I remember the strokes of her heart against my breast, and thought that 2 men cannot withstand 100. We left, paddling downstream close to the bank, and then we passed the creek where there were fishing. The great shouting had ceased, but the murmur of voices was loud like a humming of insects. Flying at noonday, the boats floated clustered together in the red light of torches under a black roof of smoke. The men talked of their sport, men that boasted, and praised and jeered, men that would have been our friends in the morning, but on the night we were already our enemies. We paddled swiftly past. We had no more friends in the country of our birth. She sat in the middle of the canoe with a covered face, silent as she is now, unseeing as she is now, and I had no regret at what I was leaving, because I could hear her breathing close to me, as I can hear her now. He paused, listened with his ear turned to the doorway. Then he shook his head and went on. My brother wanted to shout the cry of challenge, one cry only, to let the people know we were free-born robbers who trusted our arms in the great sea, and again I begged him in the name of our love to be silent. I could not hear her breathing close to me. I knew that the pursuit would come quick enough. My brother loved me. He dipped his paddle without a splash. He only said, "There is half a man in you now. The other half is in that woman. I can wait." When you are the whole man again, you will come back to me here to shout defiance. We are sons of the same mother. I made no answer. All my strength and all my spirit were in the hands that held the paddle. For I longed to be with her in the safe place, beyond the reach of the men's anger and the woman's spite. My love was so great that I thought it could guide me to a country where death was unknown. If I could only escape from Inchi-Mida's fury and from our ruler's sword. We paddled with haste, breathing through our teeth, and the blades bit deep in the smooth water. We passed out of the river. We flew in clear channels against the shallows. We skirted the black coast, and we skirted the sand beaches where the sea speaks and whispers to the land. And the gleam of the white sand flashed back past our boat, so swiftly that she ran upon the water. We spoke not, only once, and said, "Sleep, Demilin, for soon you will all want your strength." I heard the sweetness of her voice, and I never turned my head. The sun rose, and still we went on. The water fell from my face like rain from the cloud. We flew in the light and the heat, and I never looked back. But I knew that my brother's eyes behind me were looking steadily ahead, for the boat went in as straight as a bushman's dart, and when it leaves the end of the Simpetan, there was no better paddler, no better steersman than my brother. Many times together we had won races in the canoe, but he never put out our strength as we did then. Then, when the last time we paddled together, there was no braver or stronger man in our country than my brother. I could not spare the strength to turn my head and look at him, but every moment I heard a hiss of the breath getting louder behind me. Still he did not speak. The sun was high. The heat clung to my back like a flame of fire. My ribs were ready to burst, and I could no longer get enough air in my chest. And then I felt I must cry out with my last breath, "Let us rest." "God," he answered, and his voice was firm. He was strong. He was brave. He knew not fear, not fatigue, not my brother. A murmur powerful and gentle, a murmur vast and faint, a murmur of trembling leaves, of stirred boughs, ran through the tangled depths of the forest, ran over the starry smoothness of the lagoon, and the water between the piles lapped the slimy timber once with the sudden splash. A breath of warm air touched the two men's face and passed on with a mournful sound, a breath loud and short like an uneasy sigh of dreaming earth. Aristat went on in the even, low voice. We ran our canoe on the white beach of the little bay close to a long tongue of the land that seemed to bar our road. As long as the wooded cape going afar into the sea, my brother knew that place. Beyond the cape a river has its entrance, and through the jungle of the land there is a narrow path. We made a fire and cooked rice. Then we lay down to sleep on a soft sand in the shade of the canoe while she watched.